Hello, today I'm going to be talking about erectile dysfunction. So, bit of a crazy way to start a podcast, right? But it's a very, very common problem. It's one of the main symptoms that people experience when they're in a porn addiction. But what I'm going to be talking about today can hopefully share a different perspective on this problem and hopefully guide you in the right direction towards actually solving it. This is something I experienced in the past. However, nowadays, it honestly is never ever on my mind. Don't even think about it, And the way I've solved it hasn't been from, doing certain exercises. It hasn't been from having loads of therapy about it. It hasn't been from reducing feelings of anxiety. It hasn't been from taking Viagra or any other kind of drug. The way I've solved it is simply from stopping my porn use and being very much in control of my own mind so I can make rational choices moment by moment. What people will do when they have erectile dysfunction is they'll look at that and they'll try and solve it from maybe a biological perspective and start doing like exercises, or they'll start seeing it more as like a medical kind of thing rather than a psychological one. And what I'd love to do is just guide people back towards seeing it as a problem that is induced by porn and can be solved through stopping porn use entirely. Because when you watch porn over and over and over, you're obviously going to develop a tolerance cycle. And the stuff in real life may not turn you on as much anymore as the stuff on a screen, because you wire your brain to associate sexual sort of desire with pixels, basically, which is kind of insane, but that's what happens. In terms of the neuroplastic, is quite interesting. I was actually talking to somebody recently who would order certain like sexual kind of sexual objects into his cart on a particular website, and that would turn him on, right? And then what had happened is he then couldn't go on this particular website anymore. And it wasn't even a sexual website, by the way. This was like a really, really common website that a lot of people use. He could no longer go on that website anymore without getting turned on, even though like there's like furniture and like, you could probably buy like a sofa on this website. And yeah, sure, they sell some like sexual objects as well, but there's all kinds of stuff that people would buy on this website that he was on. He can no longer go on that website without getting turned on, because he's now wired his brain to like get turned on by the prospect of buying these like sexual sort of objects and whatnot on that same site. So then he like created a neural pathway in his mind that goes, when I go on this site, I get turned on. And you can basically rewire your brain to get turned on by all kinds of different things. If you associate masturbation, orgasm with a particular thing, and you repeat that behavior over and over and over, you essentially condition your brain to get turned on by engaging in that thing that you've conditioned your brain to get turned on by. It's just repetition. It's just how neural pathways work. It's neuroplasticity. It all makes sense. Like when I was younger, there would be certain things that I would do, certain things I'd like masturbate to when I was younger. And then if I saw that kind of content, then I would just get turned on again by it, because I was so used to the repetition of like wiring my brain to get turned on by that thing. Nowadays, the only thing I really get turned on by and get like erections for is my girlfriend. And that can be kind of annoying at times, because I probably get erections more often than I would like when I'm with her, but at the same time it's obviously completely fine, and it's quite natural to me. It just seems like right, I suppose. So now let's compare this whole thing with a different problem that people may have with food, and then I can really drive the point home that I want to make today and this mistake to avoid. So let's say you've got a problem with food, right? And you're overeating, and you then put on a lot of weight, and you look at the weight problem and you're like, okay, I'm really overweight here. This is a really big problem. I need to lose this weight. What should I do? I'm going to go get a gastric bypass, get this gastric band, and then that's going to change my physical body, so I'm then going to eat less food. That can be the thinking, because people look at the symptom and they go, oh, I'm overweight, I now need to fix that. But they don't see what's actually driving that behavior, which is psychological. So what's driving the behavior? What's actually causing people to put on a lot of weight? Well, it's overeating food. That's what's driving that problem. And the reason people overeat food, and I'm talking about like really, really unreasonable eating, where you're just eating a complete excessive amount, and you always will know what is, excessive or not. I'm not talking about having a piece of cake now and then, like actually right now, I can show you, I've got a cake in front of me. I'll probably eat this after this podcast. So there's nothing wrong with like eating freaking food with sugar in or whatever. That isn't the problem. It's eating a completely unreasonable amount of food, developing a psychological, emotional dependency on that feeling of overeating, that excessive eating, when you're eating what is beyond a reasonable amount of food to eat. Now, let's then look at what happens then. So people go get like a gastric bypass or whatever. They think they're going to solve like the problem because they're looking at the symptom of being overweight. They think that's going to then solve them being overweight, but they've not actually done the work on the neural pathways and what was driving that behavior. So then they've still got this really strong desire to keep on overeating the food, but then they're going to get into feelings of deprivation because now they feel like they can't eat it because they've got the gastric bypass in place. And basically their mind is going to be a bit of a mess, and it's going to feel pretty terrible, and it can lead into all kinds of places. I actually have like a distant family member who literally went down that route, and the stuff he ended up doing, he basically just went into a different compulsion entirely, and it got pretty bad. I'm not going to go into details on that. He's quite like a far distant family member, so I've not seen him in for like forever, but I got told about all this stuff by a family member. So it can get pretty bad pretty quick. And what we want to do instead is not look at the symptoms. So this is the mistake people make with erectile dysfunction, is they look at the symptom and they think it's like a sexual problem, rather than seeing, well, what's actually driving their behavior to begin with that's leading to the erectile dysfunction. What's driving it is compulsive desire, having a part of your mind, the addictive part of the mind, trying to get you to engage in a compulsive behavior, watching porn. Just like how the really overweight person is being driven by the addictive part of the mind to engage in compulsive eating, and then that leads to the symptom of being really overweight. So it's a very similar sort of thing going on, is people look at the symptoms, try and solve the symptom without actually getting to like the root cause of it. But what's happened in society is most people, when they talk about like root causes of behavior, is they go like way off like base, like they go a million miles away from what the real problem is to try understand the root, and they'll start looking at like trauma and what you were up to when you were like 6 years old. But that isn't really actually going to help you change your neural pathways, because the neural pathways like wired in a certain way aren't wired in that way due to what happened when you were 6. They're wired in that way due to the repetitive use of engaging in a compulsive behavior over time, which changes the neural pathways. You keep on acting on desire repeatedly over and over and over. You're then going to keep on wanting to act in that way. And what we need to do is deal with the wanting. So if you're overweight or you have erectile dysfunction, what is the thing we need to do? Is we need to deal with the wanting to watch porn, or we need to deal with the wanting to overeat food. And we can do that in a very specific way and actually get trained on dealing with the addictive part of the mind, think through our choices back in the present moment, not when we're 6 because we have no power there, instead in the present moment, and make rational decisions right here, right now. And what you do is you get to rewire those neural pathways. Neuroplasticity is very real, so you get to change your brain. And then the outcome is those symptoms of like being overweight or having erectile dysfunction, they naturally go away over time, because now your brain is rewired, so you're no longer engaging in the compulsive behavior, which is creating the symptom. Okay? So we've got to go to the root, but the root isn't what you probably think it is. It's not to do with when you were like 6 years old. Instead, it's to do with the repetition of engaging in compulsive behavior, and that wanting's still going to be there until it's dealt with very directly in a very precise, exact way. That is what we train people on within the Beyond Compulsion Academy. Now, if you'd like to understand how much your porn use is impacting you, then feel free to take the compulsion test and get a score out of 100. Hopefully, this episode can share a different sort of perspective on erectile dysfunction, so you don't get off base going and buying like Viagra when that isn't really going to solve the psychological problem that's going on here. Cheers for listening, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.